the heck? Hello? Hi. Yes. We're going to go through the lectures, which let me tell you so you can tell him where to find it. Oh, hi, Julius. I'm going to basically read all this stuff out loud, but under content, week 2, part 1, just read all the things. Okay. You're very welcome. See ya. What is happening here? Why is it being weird? Hmm. Go to I still love you, baby. Hello. I am, if you guys don't mind, I am not going to turn my camera on because I'm sitting in the back of the room and it's dark and the camera just looks all fuzzy and weird. So it's for the best. Julius is actually in this building, but he cannot Zoom from where he is. So he's not going to join us today, but I'm still going to mark him present because I told him what to do. Isaiah, are you excited?
Very.
Guys, Isaiah and I both have birthdays next week. It's a big week. Tuesday for him, Friday for me. It's great. He's going to be an adult. Okay, so what we're going to do today is the lecture section, which technically you could do this all on your own because it's just reading pretty much, sometimes videos, but I think it's more effective if we go through it together. And also because I need to show you where you will be looking for this kind of thing. This is the reason I hate that it's divided up into weeks, because we're not always going to be on the same week for our content. In fact, next week's story, I don't know where to find it or like all the stuff for it, but I'll figure it out because I replaced the story we were supposed to read next week with a different optional story because I like it better. So under content, you have all these weeks, and we're going into week 2, part 1. And this is not, it's 4 different things, but they're not actually all that much. So we're just going to go through it and hopefully get a little bit more insight about what the heck that story was about, other than just kind of lewd descriptions of girls in bathing suits. Give me just 1 second here to fix this. Oop. Like my freaking Zoom window is like gone now. Where are you? Okay. I don't know, that was weird. Okay. Oh, it's because I have my camera off. That's why. I see. Let's just make that bigger. Okay, so first we're going to look at setting and point of view. AMP is one of John Updike's most frequently read short stories. I told you guys I read it in 11th grade in AP. While Updike's known more for his novels than his short fiction, like The Witches of Eastwick, readers appear drawn to this story. The reasons why this is so could be many, including an ability to relate to Sammy's desire for the queen, or Queenie, as he mentioned a couple of times, and another way of life, attraction to the humor in the story, a feeling of sympathy for Sammy's attempt and failure to gain the queen's attention, or the ambiguity of the story's ending. Talked a lot about how like so much of literature revolves around ambiguity, and this is sort of a weird ambiguous ending because it's like he leaves and then just the story's over. What I personally like most about the story is both Updike's ability to carefully construct a seemingly insignificant moment in time that has a large impact on one person's life, and his ability to use Sammy's voice to convey his personality. Readers may not always think very highly of Sammy, but his character and perspective are quite clear and frequently engaging. Updike also makes an intriguing statement about the nature and consequences of both conformity and rebellion, which we'll see a little bit more about that. I think the 4th thing we're going to look at today is more about like him being a non-conformist and stuff. But I think everything that paragraph said is totally accurate. There's a really strong voice in it. I feel like even as I was reading it, I like did some mannerisms and things that felt in line with this character. And also at the end, I think it was Sarah yesterday that asked, like, what was that about? Like, what's the point of telling that story? And that's kind of what they're talking about here. Like, it's a seemingly insignificant moment, but for Sammy, it wasn't. As with all literary works, an effective analysis begins with both one's responses to the work and then with asking questions about the work. For instance, in AMP, the key questions would appear to revolve around Sammy's decision to quit his job. The first question could well be why? Why does Sammy quit? Also, how are readers supposed to view his quitting? What will the consequences of his decision be? What will be the consequences of his decision? And how are we supposed to view these consequences? Finally, what apparent point about Sammy or his community or about desire? What point is Updike making by presenting this situation? Obviously, those answers are not going to be the same for everyone, and they will depend upon your views of Sammy and his situation in life. As a result, many people disagree when interpreting this story, which is perhaps another reason why it's still so widely read. And I think that's really interesting because I haven't really thought about like more than one way to interpret it, to be honest. I've always like read it the same way. So I'm kind of excited to see what you guys think in the prompt that we'll write tomorrow and when we talk about it at length on Thursday. To start the process of answering questions and working to understand the story, we'll begin with the literary devices Updike uses to establish Sammy's situation and character, setting and point of view. And there's a little picture of an old A&P. I don't know if y'all have actually heard of A&Ps before this story, but that's just like an old-timey grocery store. The author Updike gives us one very large clue that setting will be an important element of the story. He names the story after a place. English teachers around the country thank him for that when it helps us organize our lectures. English teacher joke. While the atmosphere of the A&P grocery store is crucial to understanding Sammy's attitudes and actions, and we'll discuss this location in more detail, other elements of setting also prove important in the story. For instance, he's in New England rather than a place such as Miami, which might have more open attitudes about dress and behavior than Sammy's town. Also, he's not in some snow-ridden backwoods village, but in a town near the beach, but many residents of the town do not go to the beach, which is very telling. The fact that his town is near Salem and its witch trial history also suggests the idea that persecution of others who supposedly do not live by common social standards will be a feature of the story. His town is clearly working class to middle class, and the attitudes of his parents, Lingle and Stokesy, highlight both Sammy's economic prospects, which are not great, and the residents' expectations for those in their social class, which is to remain in the class and not try to push yourselves beyond it. And I think that's really important to consider, guys, because setting, we don't think that much about like how it affects the story other than like if it takes place in a really obvious, like if it took place in Salem, then obviously we would pay attention to setting because that's a famous place known for a particular thing, and we might think it has something to do with that. But this is all just kind of part of close reading, really getting into the details and figuring out why they're significant. And that's a thing that I didn't really consider before, like his town being near Salem and kind of reflecting that idea of persecution of people who don't live by the social standards. Very cool though. In essence, Sammy lives in a restrictive social environment that values conformity over most other attitudes. The A&P is in the center of this town, and thus it is at the heart of it, and it's reflective of the people who live there, and Sammy is stuck in that environment. The routines of the grocery store, its employees, and its customers further emphasize Sammy's daily confinement. Granted, readers see this atmosphere reflected through Sammy's perspective, but his descriptions are convincing and mirror the experiences of many people in such stores. Stores is orderly and utterly predictable, with everything stacked in aisles and checkout lanes in which everyone's supposed to follow the standard routines. Anything out of the ordinary startles them, but not to the point that they change their routines. As Sammy indicates, I bet you could set off dynamite in an A&P, and people would by and large keep reaching and checking oatmeal off their lists and muttering. Sammy hates the numbing boredom of this place, as well as the fact that it can both lead to and reflect people's misery, as his sarcastic cash register song reveals. Until the day the girls enter, though, he does not outwardly rebel against his town and the store. His internal responses, though, are another story. And point of view. In my mind, Updike's decision to tell the story from Sammy's perspective, which in literary terms is called first-person narration, we know that, is his best one. He didn't have to make this choice. He could have told the story from a third-person limited perspective, in which an outside narrator describes events and thoughts of one character, or third-person omniscient perspective, in which an outside narrator describes events and the thoughts of all the characters. If Updike had chosen third person omniscient, we would know the thoughts not only of Sammy, but of the Queen, Lingle, Stokesy, the girls with the Queen, and perhaps even the other customers. While this strategy would prove revealing, it would change the focus from Sammy to the overall situation in the store. Instead, Updike clearly wants the focus to be on Sammy, his perceptions, his manner of speaking, and his limited understanding of others and his future. As a result, readers come to know Sammy quite well. Whether or not this knowledge makes Sammy a fully sympathetic character is debatable, however. Many readers may find him likable if at times selfish, immature, and sarcastic, and they applaud his decision to quit his useless job. I don't know, does he need his job? Others may see him as judgmental, rude, sexist, and foolish. Personally, and you may disagree, I see him, this is not me, by the way, I didn't write this. I see him as possessing all of these characteristics. To be honest, my reactions to him shift with different readings of the story, sometimes being more sympathetic and sometimes less. The variety of responses the story produces is perhaps one of the reasons that people still read it. I guess that's true. I don't know if anybody in here would have read Catcher in the Rye. Obviously, that's a very famous book, but people feel so differently about the narrator in that book. And honestly, like, he's sort of similar to Sammy, like just a teenage wise guy. And people freaking hate him, but it's one of the most beloved books in American literature. So clearly there's something positive to say there too. So despite our emotional and intellectual responses to Sammy's character, the use of the first person point of view ensures that his responses will help to shape our own. More importantly, though, Sammy's responses tell us what we need to know about him. They give us a sense of his beliefs, his desires, his perception of others, and his perception of himself. His thoughts and emotions, therefore, become the anchor of the story and its main subject. All other elements of the story serve to reinforce this focus. True, the story addresses issues related to the conflicts between conformity and rebellion, and between authority and powerlessness, but readers are usually most concerned with how these issues affect Sammy, who perhaps comes to represent all people like him. That's the power of point of view in fiction. It directs readers' focuses and shapes their responses, often without them even realizing it. So, any thoughts from you guys on point of view or setting before we move on here? Okay, I'm probably going to ask some questions about these things on Thursday. Okay, moving on to characterization then. Sammy and the townspeople. So as we work our way through this story, we come to know a great deal about Sammy. We see how he views his environment, how he views the regular customers and employees of the story, how he views himself in relation to them, how he views the girls, especially the Queen, and perhaps most importantly, what he desires. We also see his understanding of the consequences of his actions on this day. All of these elements fundamentally shape our perception of the story and the ideas it conveys. Considering setting, sorry, is it just me? Does anybody watch Will and Grace? Is this not Jack from Will and Grace? Do you guys watch that show? I'm gonna have to look this up. Not right now, but I've never seen a movie version of this, and that's shocking to me if he's playing Sammy. Also, Will and Grace is a really good show, and you should watch it. Considering setting, Sammy views neither the store nor its customers favorably. In fact, he consistently describes people in insulting terms that allow him to distinguish himself from them. That's very true. Like, even the girls that he's admiring, he is using kind of like insulting language. For instance, the first customer he discusses is a cash register watching witch, who, if she'd been born at the right time, they would have burned her over in Salem. Not complimentary. He also uses these terms: sheep, house slaves, scared pigs in a chute. When he's describing the other characters, none of those are positive. So we understand that Sammy's not a fan of the regular customers. But why? What about them most bothers him? From the terms he uses, he seems offended by their pettiness, their willingness to conform to social rules, their fear of rebellion or excitement, and their willingness to accept an unchanging, unhappy existence. These characteristics apparently apply to Sammy's fellow employees as well, at least in his mind. Stokesy, for example, is just slightly older than Sammy is, but married with 2 babies chalked up on his fuselage already. But as far as I can tell, that's the only difference. By the age of 22, Stokesy has accepted that his life will be defined by his family and his job at the A&P. While some might see a sense of responsibility in this attitude, Sammy suggests that Stokesy's views on life are limited and that he has surrendered to the general lack of ambition in their town. In fact, he comments, I forgot to say he thinks he's going to be manager some sunny day, maybe in 1990 when it's called the Great Alexandrov and Petrushky Tea Company or something. The reader can easily detect both Sammy's mockery of Stokesy's rather limited ambitions, as well as Sammy's belief that Stokesy will never really be the manager. Sammy doesn't seem to dislike Stokesy, but he also doesn't seem to respect him. So I think that kind of plays into the whole thing where he just doesn't think anybody in the town is living any kind of life. Like they're just all kind of skating by complacently, and he wants more than that. Another person whom Sammy does not respect is Lingle, the store's manager and a friend of Sammy's parents. Lingle is not a cruel man, but he's someone who believes in strict conformity and his own authority. Both he and Sammy also regard him as a representative of their town's values, which benefit Lingle far more than they do Sammy. Lingle gives the three girls his sad Sunday school superintendent stare, some good alliteration there, and tries to uphold policy, which for Sammy reveals Lingle's place on the town's social ladder. Sammy believes that Lingle, like all kingpins, wants policy that rules over others and controls their behavior. The powerless or more energetic and vital, like Sammy, though, want juvenile delinquency. In Sammy's characterizations of the customers, Stokesy and Lingle, he focuses on their surrender to a lifeless conformity that takes precedence over rebellion and a strong push for individuality. However, through most of the story, Sammy's not an externally rebellious character. He follows the store's policies and does not indicate that he's planning to leave his job anytime soon. Thus, he mocks others while behaving in much the same way that they do. As a result, many readers argue that what Sammy dislikes in his fellow townspeople are the qualities he sees in himself. This seems like an apt observation when we consider that he's still called Sammy, which is a pretty childlike name, and wears an apron and goofy bow tie at the menial job that he goes to from his parents' house where he still lives after his mother has ironed his white shirt. He's no mad rebel out to overthrow the man. Instead, he's something of a nobody, and he directly confronts this reality when he encounters the queen. And I will go ahead and go out on a limb and say that like the fact that she's not adhering to dress code is going to be what makes her attractive to him, because he wants to kind of break out of that sense of conformity. When Sammy initially sees the three girls in bathing suits enter the store, his focuses and reactions are pretty predictable. He's not concerned about their personalities, their views on international trade, or whether or not they might be cold in the air conditioning. He ogles them and compares their relative merits based on their physical attributes. Predictably, again, the most attractive of the three, the queen, becomes the center of his attention. Plaid and big tall Goonie, as he so kindly labels the other girls. Actually, I think Plaid, he called her more often like the fat one or the chunky one or something. The chunky one with the tan. They don't measure up to the queen either physically or in terms of attitude. But then again, neither does he. And he's definitely aware of the stark differences between her and himself. One of Sammy's most pressing desires is his lust for the queen. Oh, good. I get to read some more of this stuff. Based on her beauty and scanty attire, as we can see from his many comments on her white shoulders, the clean, bare plane of the top of her chest, and the two smoothest scoops of vanilla I had ever known were there. In addition to her appearance, however, he's also drawn to her attitude. When the three girls walk in, the queen's two companions are self-conscious, but not the queen. As Sammy relates, she kind of led them, the other two peeking around and making their shoulders round. She didn't look around, not this queen. She just walked straight on slowly on those long white prima donna legs. She also does not tip, even when she knows Sammy and Stokesy are watching her every move. She brazenly defies social convention and takes control of the situation, exhibiting a self-confidence that Sammy has apparently never shown or felt. That's exactly what I said. Another reason that she attracts Sammy is because of the way of life that she represents. She comes from a higher economic class, and this status enables her to feel superior to the store patrons and employees, just as Sammy wishes to do, as he wishes that he could do. Sammy envisions living in her world when she speaks to Lingle. and his vision reveals his recognition to the relative tackiness of his family's world. And this quote is basically like he's saying that he's imagining himself in her living room and like what her parents must be like and how different they are from his own parents, and really kind of contrasting the two. To Sammy, the people of the Queen's world are refined, elegant, and haughty. The people of his own are low class, cheap, and because they don't know or expect anything more, inferior to those in the Queen's social set. He believes that the Queen sees them in the same way, viewing everyone in the grocery store as pretty crummy once she remembers her place in relation to theirs. Of course, she apparently believed in her superiority to them, even before she entered the store, otherwise she wouldn't have entered it wearing only a bathing suit, thereby flouting the rules. While some readers may see the Queen as immature, arrogant, and disdainful, which is actually kind of a lot like Sammy, he sees her as an emblem of what he'd like to be, or at least the type of girl that he'd like to be worthy of. And as a result, he makes a decision that he knows will impact the rest of his life. Any thoughts or questions about that before we talk about his quitting? All right. Sammy's quitting. The quitting scene. Okay. So most readers contend that the climax, the moment of highest intensity, or the point of change in the story occurs in this story when Sammy quits his job. He does so in response to Lingle's abrasive treatment of the girls because of their bathing suits, but Sammy's motivations are more complex than just reacting to Lingle's rude display of closed-minded authority, which is quite predictable and for many readers warranted because of the girls' behavior. Lingle's behavior would have been warranted. As we might expect, Sammy also wants to get the Queen's attention and show her that he's both like her and worthy of her. In addition, he's rejecting the life that he has lived and that his parents want him to continue to live. In essence, he wants to free himself, which makes sense because he is 19 years old, and most of you are within a year or two of that, and you probably can identify with that feeling of wanting to free yourself of the life that has been kind of like thrust on you. In essence, he wants to free himself. All these motivations plus others spur a decision that has distinct consequences both in the short term and the long term, which Sammy himself firmly understands. Many readers have characterized this decision as a spur-of-the-moment act, as if he just reacts without thinking. Personally, I don't think this is quite accurate. I actually agree with this. To me, Sammy's decision seems to build throughout the confrontation between the girls and Lingle. At one point, for instance, Lingle asks Sammy if he's finished ringing up the girl's jar of herring snacks. Gross. Sammy tells the readers, "I thought and said no, but it wasn't about that I was thinking." Like he was just sort of, he wasn't really answering the question about whether he had already rung those up. He just was saying no to like something else in his head, or like, maybe just telling him no because he feels like he wants to tell the man no. At the end of the passage, after describing his actions of ringing up the jar, taking the money from the Queen and giving her her change, he says he hands over the jar in the bag, all the time thinking. He doesn't specify what he's thinking about, but one could read the line as saying that he's thinking about how he will respond to Lingle's treatment of the girls and attempt to show the Queen that he's worthy of her attention. In other words, he does not just react emotionally and without forethought. This has been something that's been he's been kind of stewing about since Lingle started treating these girls poorly. The moment in which Sammy quits reveals both a part of his motivation and the futile nature of his gesture. Futile meaning no point to it. Why did he quit? It's not going to change anything. He asserts the girls, and who'd blame them, are in a hurry to get out, so I say I quit to Lingle quick enough for them to hear, hoping they'll stop and watch me, their unsuspected hero. So like he wants them to actually see him for the first time, to have them realize that this person they thought of as an anonymous drone is actually their hero and one of them, not one of the lowly AMP crowd. He's not even really quitting because he is thinking that because he wants to stand up for them, or because he's tired of this. Like, all that's true, but he's really just hoping that it'll make the girls notice him. He fails in this attempt, however, as the girls keep right on, leaving me with Lingle and a kink in his eyebrow. The girls do not acknowledge his gesture and leave without even noticing him. His action completely changes his life, but it means nothing to them. He's left not with the queen, but with what he had before, which is Lingle. If Sammy needed more confirmation of his averageness, it's hard to think of something that would make the point as strikingly, which is actually kind of sad. Like, he did all of this stuff and it didn't matter. He changed his life by quitting, and like maybe he needed that job. We don't really have that information, but he decided this was more important. I love this little cartoon there. Adorable. The remainder of the story, so this is the consequences of quitting. The remainder of the story is equally as important as Sammy's actual quitting and shows the deeper significance and consequences of his decision. Before the quitting scene, Sammy tells readers, now here comes the sad part of the story. At least my family says it's sad, but I don't think it's so sad myself. This introduction provides an important clue about Sammy's view of his quitting. He does not seem despondent about losing his job or people's reaction to his decision. Instead, he sees it differently. How exactly he sees it isn't completely clear, but we sense that he does not view it as the crushing downfall of his life. This doesn't mean, though, that he views it as wholly positive. Once the girls walk out of the store, Lingle confronts Sammy about quitting and briefly tries to get him to reconsider. Lingle sighs and begins to look very patient and old and gray and says, Sammy, you don't want to do this to our mom and dad. It's true, I don't, but it seems to me that once you begin a gesture, it's fatal not to go through it. This brief passage reveals some key details about the characters. Lingle tries to avoid being condemnatory and attempts to reason with Sammy by playing on his loyalties and his parents' fear of social embarrassment, but he does not attempt to understand Sammy's perspective. For his part, Sammy recognizes that his decision will negatively affect his family and their reputation, but he also knows that his pride is at stake. If he goes back on his decision, he'll humiliate himself and lose both the respect of others and his own self-respect. Lingle then makes a rather astonishing statement to Sammy. You'll feel this for the rest of your life. Sammy knows he's right, but he still will not give in. When you think about Lingle's assertion, though, the absurdity of it becomes more evident. Why should Sammy quitting a grocery store clerk job at the age of 19 cause him to feel repercussions for the rest of his life? How important could this job really be? To the people of Sammy's town, it's apparently fundamentally important and a marker of Sammy's character and willingness to abide by the town's social standards. His failure to be one of them, as it were, will mark him as a malcontent and an outsider. See, guys, we thought that this was no big deal and that there was no point in even telling the story. There's a huge point for Sammy. In the final paragraph, Updike gives readers an ambiguous close to the story. Sammy comments, I look around for my girls, but they're gone, of course. His characterization of the girls as my girls reinforces the idea that he wants to belong with them, but his final, of course, shows that he knows his dream is futile and always was. He's nothing to them because he is just a common resident of a dull, go-nowhere town. When Sammy then describes the screaming mother and children, peat moss and aluminum lawn furniture on the pavement, and Lingle at Sammy's register checking out the sheep, he highlights the unhappiness, cheapness, and entrapment that he believes characterize his town. Then his final words to the reader, my stomach kind of fell as I felt how hard the world was going to be to me hereafter, details his recognition that he can never go back to the person he was or the comfort level he had with others. Instead, people will now treat him differently because of his rebellion. He also will no longer be under the protective wing of authority figures like Lingle and his parents, nor will he be in the shelter of the A&P. Readers view the close of the story in a number of different ways. Some see it as a temporary feeling of anxiety that will give way to a new sense of freedom. Others see it as a representation of the feeling that all people who break away from social norms experience. They'll be outsiders and therefore viewed as suspicious, but they still will be superior to all who conform to others' authority. Others read the close more pessimistically, seeing it as Sammy's recognition that he's fundamentally messed up his life for the sake of a useless gesture that will gain him nothing but hardship in the long run. He has his youthful pride, but he's stripped himself of a viable future in the only world that he knows. And there are other possible readings as well, all of which depend upon one's views of Sammy, his town, and the situation in the story. So, any thought? We have one more thing to read, which is talking about Sammy as a nonconformist. Any thoughts about this bit, the consequences of quitting before we leave, before we go on to this last thing? Okay, this is quite short. Um, this is from a textbook, actually. I'm trying to make that a little bit bigger, but it's not working for me. Oh well. According to Sammy, Lingle is pretty dreary, but this capsuled evaluation is rendered even harsher by the implications of Sammy's metaphorical description of the manager. Lingle, Sammy reports, has been haggling with a truck full of cabbages before he comes in and confronts the girls. It's his usual habit to scuttle like a beetle into the, yes, I'm still here, leave me alone. What? I just clicked on something. Sorry. It's his usual habit to scuttle like a beetle into the office behind the door marked manager, where he hides all day like a rat. As a close friend of Sammy's family, Lingle carries some parental authority. As a teacher in the Sunday school, he's a voice in the church. As the manager of the A&P, he's a voice in the business community. In short, Lingle represents the voice of the establishment. As one of the kingpins who enforce policy, he sees himself as the voice of authority, the guardian of the community ethic. Sammy even imagines Lingle thinking all these years the A&P was a great big Dune and he was the head lifeguard. In this role, then, with his sad Sunday school superintendent stare, which equates flesh with sin, ooh, ooh, I like that. I might ask you guys about that on Thursday. He delivers in the name of decency his pious judgment to the girls. After this, come in here with your shoulders covered. It's our policy. Asserting that they are decent, Queenie leads her friends indignantly from the store. Sammy, yes, okay. Nope. Sammy, upon whom the issues underlying the incident have forced a decision, declares his intention to quit. His gesture is both an affirmation of the girl's decency and a rejection of the A&P and the misplaced values for which it stands. That his act is a little histrionic, a little hysterical, results from his adolescence. It does not detract from the basic nobility of his chivalric intent, nor does it reduce the magnitude of his personal commitment. As Sammy prepares to leave, however, Lingle makes a final pitch for the establishment. You'll feel this, he warns, for the rest of your life. But Sammy is not buying Lingle's line. He punches the no sale tab and walks outside where the sunshine is skating around the asphalt. Sammy knows that Lingle's prediction is true. As he looks back into the store, he sees Lingle checking the sheep through and realizes that the world is going to be hard on him hereafter. He's aware, of course, that he separated himself from the flock, from the A&P crowd, and he's chosen to set himself against the majority to incur that wrath with which Emerson declared was a lot of the nonconformist. And that's all. So I really like that these lectures are available for us, because I think it's really helpful in helping us to kind of dig into the text more than just on a surface level, and see how all these things that we talked about during the intro to literature, like setting and point of view and characterization, how all those things really can deeply affect what's going on in the story. Give me just a second, because I need to look and see. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and try to open the quiz for this. Where are we? A&P, A&P. Edit. This is 8 questions, by the way. Today is February 17th. Okay, I'm trying to find this one thing that has to deal with you being able to actually access this. Come on, how do I change that? Oh, here we go. Remove all conditions. Save and close. Okay. That's done. And A and P prompt, I want to change. Today is the 17th, it's the 19th. And I know this is annoying just waiting on me to figure all this out, but here we go. Okay, so what I did, I just went in and opened the quiz for this and the prompt. The quiz is under quizzes. The prompt is under assignments. For those of you who are in this class last semester, you're used to doing it under discussions, but it's under prompts this time. These are going to be due on Friday, but also I will give you Friday to work on these. Tomorrow we'll just discuss the story. And then Friday you'll have time to do both of these in class. But just to kind of give you an idea of what you're going to be doing, and I can share my screen with you guys again. You're going to respond to one or more of the questions or ideas posed in the lectures and present your own thoughts about the literature. You don't have questions because you don't have the book. You do need to include at least one direct quotation from the story with correct parenthetical citation. 150 to 200 words, which if you did this last semester, you're used to writing 200 words. And prompts should not be just plot summaries, nor should they contain plagiarized content. Say something new, give an opinion. And this is a thing that we kind of dealt with at the end of last semester. We're talking about signal phrases used to introduce a quote. Have some kind of phrase like the narrator says. Like sometimes people will just plop a quote down in the middle and not really explain like what it is or why you're using it, and that can be confusing. So this is a very open-ended kind of prompt. There are several questions that we looked at. You can also just talk about your ideas on one of these topics like characterization, point of view, anything that we talked about in the lectures today. I don't think I changed anything in that, but like I said, those are both due Friday, but you'll also have the time in class to work on them on Friday. Any questions before I let you guys go?
No.
Okie doke. Well, then I will see y'all tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.